Missions to Mars, launch pad explosions, deep space discoveries and collisions with comets, all in 12 months in a galaxy not so far away. I'm Martin Stanford. This is an Insight Space Special. Welcome to Insight, as we look back at 12 months of small steps and giant leaps in space exploration in 2016. In this special program, we'll take you on a voyage of discovery through plans to explore new worlds, seek out new life, and resupply the space station. It's been a year of bold claims, talk of missions to Mars, and highs and lows on the launch pad. To help us on our journey, we're joined by the space journalist Sarah Cruddas and Professor of Planetary Science at Birkbeck University, Ian Crawford. First, a bit of time travel and a reminder of some of the out-of-this-world moments from this year.
Skeleton go for post sequence 4.
Copy that. And Jeremy has a PC start the display recorder, please.
Skeleton go for LA2 sector vision.
OTC is the LTD. Start is complete. Copy all.
Nozzle check of the firing chain is armed. Down suppression water system armed.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
I mean, first of all, why go anywhere, right? I think there are really two fundamental paths. History is going to bifurcate along two directions. One path is we stay on Earth forever, and then there will be some eventual extinction event. I don't have an immediate doomsday prophecy, but it's eventually, history suggests there will be some doomsday event. The alternative is to become a spacefaring civilization and a multi-planet species, which I hope you would agree that is the right way to go.
Because he is about to emerge into the vacuum of space to begin the first spacewalk of his career.
Any mission is a good mission, so you can't afford to get fussy. They don't come around very often, so you take anything you can get.
So basically, Schiaparelli has reached the ground with a velocity, so several hundreds of kilometers per hour, and is unfortunately destroyed by the impact.
To determine the dynamic condition at which the lander has touched the ground, and then we know whether it could have survived structurally or not.
Rosetta had spent over 2 years at Comet 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko, but her time there was already coming to an end. She had made millions of measurements, and by now knew the comet inside out. She had taken photos from all angles, collected dust grains, and sampled the gases in the comet's atmosphere. After a long search, she had even managed to find the strange place where Philae had ended up, fast asleep in a dark corner of the comet.
American astronauts from other countries, from around the world. It was a privilege to fly with all of them, and we must never stop doing this. We must lead, we must learn, and we must discover.
Yes, we have to overcome problems, but we do all the time, every day. We are solving problems together as one.
When I talk with youngsters, I tell them that they are part of the Mars generation. They will see it happen, and if they want, they can be a part of it.
LZ-1, the Falcon is landing. Landing operators moving to procedure 11.100, section 3 on LZ-1.
Up on Delta V. Roger, go move, Juno. Welcome to Jupiter.
I think the future where we are, a spacefaring civilization, and out there among the stars is infinitely more exciting and inspiring than one where we are not.
So let's begin with our journey to Mars. NASA and space tycoon Elon Musk both revealed more details about their separate plans to go to the Red Planet. Here's a little more of what the SpaceX boss had to say.
This is a flight through of the crew compartment. Just want to give you a sense of what it would feel like to actually be in the spaceship. I mean, in order to make it appealing and increase that portion of the Venn diagram of people who actually want to go, it's got to be really fun and exciting, and it can't feel cramped or boring. So the crew compartment or the occupant compartment is set up so that you can do zero-G games, you can float around. There'll be like movies, lecture halls, cabins, a restaurant. It'll be like really fun to go. You're gonna have a great time.
Well, joining me in the studio are the space journalist Sarah Cruddas and Professor of Planetary Science Ian Crawford. Welcome to you both. Hello. It strikes me it really has been a Mars kind of year. There's even a drama about it, you know, a hypothetical adventure into space. How close are we to the real thing, Sarah?
Well, I think if we'd have continued with the same rate after the moon landings, we could have been at Mars by the 1980s and the 1990s. That didn't happen. Obviously, the moon was about politics, and that's the reason we didn't go back to the moon. But you know, listening to Elon Musk speak, I mean, we're in such an exciting era in space exploration. We're going from a shift where it's all about governments and now it's about private individuals. And you've got people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who's behind Blue Origin and Amazon, who've got more money than countries. And they're saying, we're going to do this. We're going to go to Mars. And to compare it to history, I mean, you could say Apollo was the Columbus moment. And now this is the Mayflower moment in terms of exploration of space. And humans were built to go over the hill. They were built to explore. It's what we've done within our own planet. And now we're seeing people say, yes, we're going to do this. We're going to go to Mars. We've heard it a lot in the past. But I think the real shift is the real change. The real difference is that now you've got private individuals. And where there's money to be made, resources to be lived off, just as with exploration on Earth, you're going to get people trying to do this. So yes, Mars probably won't happen until at least the 2030s, and it will be an international collaboration. But we're really starting to see a shift in attitudes towards how we actually achieve that.
Ian, are we going to Mars just because we can, or because it's a really important place to explore?
Well, it is a really important place to explore, but of course there are the motivations are many and various. So what's driving a lot of the private sector interest in Elon Musk is the idea to, well, build on two things really. The excitement of exploring. I think Sarah's right. I mean, exploring is part of human nature. I think there's part of it that is based on building collaborations between the private and the public sector. So NASA does have a lot of expertise in space exploration, but the private sector can bring a lot of extra finance and a lot of a new perspective. And then I think there is a potential private market. I mean, I think space tourism is kind of on the horizon, where people will actually start to pay to travel. I mean, paying to go to Mars is a long way in the future. I think we'll start with suborbital flights and then maybe space hotels. And I personally am an advocate of going back to the moon first.
But there could be a market for that eventually?
I think there will be eventually, yes.
Yeah. I think it's in terms of commercial space, that's not where the money's going to be made. Definitely there's an appetite for people spending money to go with Virgin Galactic and other such companies. But I would argue that the money to be made is from data, actually, and the information we can get from going into space. So Facebook, for example, their money comes from data. It's no different from space. So going into space, having private companies which are able to look back at Earth, gather information, sell that information, that's one of the first business cases for exploring space. And then further into space, yes, you've got the tourism element, but also things such as resources, mining. I mean, space is a $1 trillion industry. It's as big as you want it to be because space is massive. So there's a lot of money to be made in ways we can't yet imagine, and tourism is just a part of that.
So space is, but Mars perhaps isn't. So there is a lot of money to be made in mining resources in space, and this will be a big part of it. But Mars isn't perhaps the obvious place you would go to mine. I think so. Mars is a place you would go for science. It's a way that in the distant future, tourism may be a niche market, but I agree it's unlikely to be to the main.
We may be getting ahead of ourselves here. I want to ask you both: what are we going to do first? What technology do we not have? Can we build a spaceship that would go from here to Mars yet?
The technology's pretty much almost there. I mean, if it was there, we'd have done it. If the money was there, we'd have done it. So we haven't done it for a reason. But what I would argue in terms of exploration, I'd actually agree with Martin, is that, you know, we should be going to the moon first. And the European Space Agency particularly are looking at a lunar village. It's a nice next natural step from the International Space Station.
Is that the next thing to do, Ian? Go back to the moon?
I do think so. I think to some degree these can be developed in parallel, yes. Yeah. There's still a lot to learn about Mars using robotic spacecraft, right, before we could responsibly send people there. But in parallel, on the human spaceflight front, yes, I do believe very strongly the moon is the next obvious step, partly because the moon is still a lot of unfinished business on the moon scientifically, but perhaps just as important, developing the capability of having people to learn how to live and work in space in really challenging environments. The moon is a place you can trial all that technology out relatively close to home, where there are options to get people back if things go wrong, which there are not once you send them to Mars.
Well, before we even go back to the moon, let's stay a little bit closer to Earth, shall we? And the International Space Station, let's talk about that. It received its first expandable activity module. What is it? Well, it's an inflatable living space designed to increase the size of space installations like the ISS. NASA describes it as being rather like a tent. The technology is expected to play a large part in any eventual off-planet habitat, as it takes minimal space and fuel to transport from place to place, a future for expandable tents. It's a bit more than a tent.
It is a bit more than a tent, but what I love about this is technology which was developed in the 1960s by NASA. They didn't really do anything with it, and then Bigelow Aerospace took the IP, they developed the technology, they've sold it back to NASA, so they've made a business case for it, which is what's going to drive forward innovation in space. And now it's flying on the International Space Station. It's not actually in use, astronauts aren't living and working there, but they have tested it out, and it's the next step in terms of how we explore space, how we do things cheaper, because to launch into space, the more stuff you're taking with you, simple rocket equations tell us you're going to need a lot more fuel. Also, the less stuff you can take with you, if it's something which can be compact, it reduces the fuel, which means you can then build a bigger space station, build a bigger habitat once you are in space. So it's a really exciting new area, and also the collaboration between the private industry and government industry is hugely exciting.
As well. Is this purely about getting more bodies up there, so more scientists can be working there to discover more?
So I think Sarah's right. I mean, the cheaper you make space exploration, the more space exploration will happen, and the more benefits you'll have on both the scientific front and the commercial front, and all areas will benefit. And so things like Beam, where you've got a new, or relatively new, a new innovation anyway, being deployed for the first time that will enable new and larger structures to be built in space, and more people in space, and then ultimately you could envisage similar things on the surface of the moon or on similar Mars.
I was going to ask you about that. Does this tent-type structures, would they applicable to Mars? To maybe the moon,
the moon, yes. I mean, a bit of modification is required, but the Beam has been deployed in a vacuum on the space station, right? So it's a vacuum-qualified habitat. And once you've got vacuum, well, they're testing it to see how qualified it is, right? That's why it's on the space station. But once the technology is perfected, then you've got an expandable, inflatable module which can be used in any airless environment. So this would include the surface of the moon. So, yes.
And you've got to remember the point we're trying to get into in space exploration is where you could land. This maybe is 100 years in the future, but this is where we're really aiming. You could land on any new world with nothing. You could 3D print everything you absolutely needed. So you could potentially, and 3D printing is really big in terms of space exploration now, 3D print with whatever was on the ground, some sort of habitat which would then be expanded, so you'd have the pattern for that. So it sounds like
the machine to do the printing.
Yeah, you take the machine, but that's it. So everything else you need, every single tool,
the resource you need, the
where you live,
come from the planet where you land.
That's the potential we're trying to get to, because you've got to think. Look at the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. You've got water, which makes up rocket fuel. So you can already use the asteroid belt as a petrol station to enable you to explore further. It sounds like science fiction, but we live off resources. And then you've got all these minerals and it's mind-boggling what's going on now, and it's just what I love about Beam is that's the first step in really changing the way we're able to live and work in space.
Okay, more conversation in just a moment. This is Insight coming up. It's Lost in Space, the voyage to Mars with too much velocity.